Hello everyone, in this video I want to talk about PolarisBisoEditor. It was developed for Navy cards and actually then ported to Polaris, and this tool is the only one that I found that was able to actually undervolt Polaris cards, and I really love undervolting, as you might know by the name of my channel, and I always felt very bad by the fact that I couldn't do anything about efficiency on Polaris cards with the stock BIOS editors that I found online, which were PolarisBisoEditor. This one you can find on GitHub, and SRB Polaris. So both these tools allow you to modify frequencies and open the, of course, any Polaris BIOS, but they do not allow you. I mean, this used to work. You used to be able to manually change the millivolts for each power clock state. But since I think 2019, the AMD BIOS doesn't read those values anymore from this tab table, and the problem is that when like Polaris faded out and people were no longer interested in making the tools for this architecture, which was it is quite old, from 2016. Like no one cared about finding another way to undervolt, but the guys at PolarisBisoEditor did, and they provided you for some tools. It is hard to understand how this works because there is no clear to understand guide, and probably also the reason is that different cards have different voltage controllers which respond to different settings on the BIOS. And so this video is like half baked. I'm still fiddling with the tool and have no clear understanding what works and what doesn't. But I also find out that, for example, this particular configuration with those values here works, but if I set this to 0, everything starts to crash. So those are actually useful for some reason, I don't know really. And so I set those very low clocks, and the reason is that this machine has a very terrible power supply, and I talked about this machine on a previous video on my channel. And the card is a Chinese 580, which actually has 2048 shaders. So it's basically a 570. Even the clocks are the 571s. It's just a scam, as everything coming from AliExpress. But I guess it works. But what I found out is that I was tuning the machine, I was tuning the card, and I was setting the card to 100 watts, which is usually a very nice sweet spot for Polaris 580s, 480s, 570s. That's where they usually perform the best, and I was getting awful performance. So I decided to bring out some other cards in the meanwhile. A blower 580 that I had from another client that I was testing, and this XFX 580 GTS something, which is a super overclocked version of the 580. It was running at 1400 megahertz default. This card was broken actually. Like it was giving screen tearing and artifacting and black screens actually. So I double checked for reference the other cards, setting them at 100 watts. Even if this one was like having issues, they would still perform so much better than this. Like this one would get like 8000 graphics score, and the other cards were getting 13,000 at 110 watts, 120 watts. This one at 100 watts, I was getting 6,000 score, like 5-strike. So now for reference, I'm gonna run 5-strike in the meanwhile. This is the time spy run, and the score for time spy is very good. I mean, this machine is like a very old i7 920. So I will run 5-strike in the meanwhile while I talk. So I knew something was wrong, and I tried to, of course, I already did the BIOS modding with PolarisBisoEditor, and I was getting like shitty performance. Like the card would clock around 600 megahertz during 5-strike. At 100 watts, while the other cards were clocking around 1000 at 100 watts. And so it was awful. And so I was digging for a solution, and I came around this PolarisBisoEditor, which I did never try before. And I started to play with random values. And I'm sorry, I know this is a half-baked video, because I also tested then the tool on all of the other cards that I have around, like this blower reference 480, which is also already tuned to a 580 by the seller. So I bought this from eBay during the mining crisis for a lot of money, and it was actually a 480 flashed to 580, but it's still working fine. And yeah, so basically, as soon as I started like tuning the BIOS with the right BIOS editor, I put some random values, and the score immediately jumped to 8,000 without anything else, like any other action on my part, like only by minus 25 millivolt offset on the VDDCI, and nothing else. I think the minus 25 already unlocked 200 megahertz more from this card. And then I moved to the other cards to test them, and I found out that on the other cards it didn't make that much of a difference, but I was able to fix this XFX. So this XFX card was giving black screens over 1000 megahertz. Okay, anything on the core over 1000 would get black screens. The test would still finish and the scores were still good, but I was getting like random black screen on TimeSpy and Firestrike. So what I did on this, I opened the editor and I found out that the DPM value for the load line slope value for this was set to 3 stock, while all the other cards were 1. So I set this to 2, and I was with the setting of 2, I was able to rise the clock to 1250 without black screens. It was still black screen after 1300, but with this simple setting, I was able to gain 200 megahertz. So my guess is that this card was coming too much aggressively undervolted by stock in the stock settings, and so by setting the load line to a higher value, it became stable at higher clocks, which made it perform much better. I mean, it made it usable at much higher clocks than before, because this was already working at 1000 megahertz, but now it's working at 1200, which is much better. Also because it has like a very beefy cooler and I guess a very good VRM, because this run at stock at 1400, which is stupid because Polaris doesn't really scale that much over 1300 in my experience. I mean, this card was using almost 200 watts at 1400, and it's now using around 120 watts to run at 1200. So I lost maybe 10% of performance, like 15% performance, and more than 15% performance lost for 50% less power. So it's definitely worth it. And on the reference card, the modding didn't make much difference. And what I found out also by tuning those other cards, because this machine cannot run modern games, while all the other machine can. And I found out that modern games are really, really picky when I set the manual voltages in the red BIOS editor curve, which I show you later. Okay, let me finish this and show you what I mean. So here's the Firestrike score. Let me see, it should be around 10,500 or 10,800. And the maximum power consumption that I got was 80 watts. So that is insane efficiency. And the maximum voltage is 0.85 for 969 megahertz. So let me show you some BIOSes that I'm talking about. So let's load the most interesting one. So on this one, this is a reference 580 modded. I don't really know the stock clocks, and maybe this are the stock clocks. I'm not really sure. So it's a 480 modded to 580. And what I found on this BIOS is that this table was actually very important for running Battlefield 4. So any value that I put in under up to I think 1000 on the 15 value, on the number 15, and scaling everything to 800 in 25 millivolt steps would work on Firestrike and TimeSpy and Unigine, but then would crash with Warzone and Battlefield 2042. So I had to set this to 1200 in the end. So this one is a older BIOS that didn't work, because I then started to work on the machine itself. So this actually was very important for the games, but didn't make much of a difference in the Firestrike scores with this card. So let me show you the controller. So this is the value that worked to fix my XFX card. I'll try to load the XFX BIOS now. So this is the XFX BIOS. I don't know why this also has this that I could modify, but what actually ended up working was setting this to 2. Let me check. So this is the final BIOS with the final clocks, but this would still crash with some games. And I actually, oh god, I still didn't try this one with actually with Warzone and Battlefield, so I still have to do this because it's still a work in progress again. So this probably will not work with Warzone and Battlefield, and I will have to check this. Even though this one has lower clock than the lower card. So for the Chinese card that I have here, which has much lower clocks, what ended up working was, here it is. Here's the 4 GB BIOS for the Chinese card. And again, on this one, the first good result came from -25 here, and this unlocked the 2000 points. And then working on those one, unlocked another maybe 3000 points in the end, because I got 8000 points at 100 watts, and now I get 10,800 points at 80 watts. So it's mind-blowing really, and this came from those values here. And I still do not understand how this all works. I still do not understand why the number 15 value is 2048 here, but that's how I got this insane score. And the machine here cannot run Warzone nor Battlefield 2042, I think, but I could run Fortnite, which is the only thing this computer cares about. This gamer plays Fortnite, and Fortnite performance is amazing at around 60 watts. So yeah, it's mind-blowing the efficiency that I could get with this card after tuning. I'll try to repeat myself, but this was scoring 6,000 points at 100 watts, 101 watts as the limit. And now it's scoring 10,800 at 80 watts. So the efficiency gain is over the roof, just totally insane. And yeah, I guess that's really what matters. And so the only thing that I can say about this tool is try it, fiddle with the voltages. You have to try with different games, of course, based on your game, the games you play. But if you're building a machine for someone else, you really have to make sure that you have a comprehensive library of games to test with. It's not gonna be easy, and I really have no idea how different cards will react to this tool, other than the fact that this one seemed to work always. It's 125 offset voltage, but yeah, the tool works. It's amazing. If you have a Chinese 580 like mine, definitely check it out and try to fiddle with it, because you're probably having awful efficiency with the stock BIOS. And I guess that's all for this ramble, very messy video. Ciao!